Okay, so welcome to our third and final instalment on leading responsible technology. This time I'm going to focus on governance and responsibility. So the two things we really want to avoid is stupidity and hypocrisy. Stupidity is things like deploying systems where you have no basis for thinking that it might actually achieve your objectives. I gave the example last time of using predictive policing software without reliable independent evaluations that pointed to evidence that these things would indeed meet their primary objective of reducing crime. We looked at hypocrisy when we talked about the Australian government introducing an ethical framework for artificial intelligence at the same time as it was running robo-debt with absolutely no ethical framework or guidance or responsible approach. In other words, it was sort of saying, do what I say, adopt this ethical framework without actually demonstrating that it itself could build systems that really took ethics seriously. So we don't want to be either stupid or hypocritical in how we think about responsible technology. Now, I've mentioned already there's a real baseline issue here around compliance. It's absolutely critical to know what legal requirements apply and make sure you have systems in place to ensure that you do comply with those legal obligations. So that is absolutely essential as a baseline. But a lot of the time, organisations and individuals will want to go further and ensure that they're not just doing what the law says they have to do, but they are deliberately making responsible decisions around which technologies they design, which technologies they sell or buy, how they deploy technologies in particular contexts, and so forth. So the first important point to note is that depending on where you are in an organisation, your obligations and your power is going to look quite different. So for a company, for example, at the absolute top of ensuring all of this and setting an organisation up to take responsible technology seriously is, of course, the board of directors. Now, again, there's a compliance level here. If you're a member of the board of directors, you have to exercise your powers in good faith. You have to act in the best interests of the company. You have to use due care, skill, and diligence, and so forth, right? You're also responsible as a board for high-level strategy and governance. So if responsible technology is something your organisation is committed to, then developing a strategy through which that will occur is obviously something that the board is going to have to do and take responsibility for. And that's whether the company is one that's looking at responsible technology development, responsible technology design, responsible technology use, and so forth. The board of directors is also going to have responsibility for a number of other things that sit alongside technology, things like a data strategy, cybersecurity strategy, and so forth. Now, I've said before, a lot of the time you don't need to reinvent wheels. So for cybersecurity, there is a very basic ASIC set of questions to boards of directors. So if you're thinking about developing as a board, taking responsibility for cybersecurity, developing a cybersecurity strategy, ASIC has materials you can look at that help the board ask the right questions about cybersecurity within their organisation. So this doesn't always involve starting from scratch. Sometimes you can pull in particular guidance and documents. But ultimately, it is the board of directors that sets the direction of a company and a governance body that might look a little bit different for other organisations as well. So what about employees, right? What does responsible technology look like if you're working for an organisation but you're not actually in that senior sort of, board of directors role? Essentially, know your organisation's policies, right? So the organisation hopefully has already developed good policies for how it manages technology design, technology use, etc. And you can understand what those policies are. Make sure you fulfil your role with respect to organisational policies, both generally, of course, but also in this particular context around technology. So for example, if your role involves evaluation and testing, do that well, right? And so forth, right? So making sure you fulfill your bit of what the organisation as a whole is trying to achieve. Now, if your organisation doesn't have an adequate policy that deals with the kinds of issues that are important in the context of that organisation around issues like responsible technology, then within the organisation you can make the case for doing so, right? Why might it help your organisation to have good policies around responsible technology, right? So you can internally talk to other people in your organisation about why the organisation might want to do something more in that direction. And if at the end of the day, the organisation is doing things that you personally believe are unethical, so if you're not comfortable with your organisation's policy and conduct, both generally and in the context of responsible technology, if you think the organisation is acting stupidly or hypocritically, despite your advocacy, right, then you can consider your options. Maybe this is not the best place to work, right? And there have been really good examples of people, leaving, high-powered jobs in organisations like Google and so forth because they don't believe that their organisation is taking responsibility for what it is releasing into the world. So you can take personal responsibility by walking away if your internal advocacy is unsuccessful. You might also have rights under public interest disclosure laws. So, for example, if an organisation is acting illegally, you might be able to report that in various ways. And I'm not going to go through that in detail because depending on the nature of the organisation, whether it's a corporation, whether it's a government department and so forth, what those laws look like can be quite different, and you can seek legal advice about what you're allowed to disclose to whom so you don't get in trouble with any confidentiality requirements and so forth. But there is often an out there, and again, many very courageous and brave people have spoken out about illegal conduct happening inside organisations and so forth, including in relation to technology, but by no means limited to that. But as an employee, ultimately, you can look and see what your organisation is doing, help it do it really, really well, but also know what to do and think about what to do in circumstances where you believe it's acting irresponsibly, either with respect to technology or indeed anything. What about entrepreneurs? I think too often being responsible around technology is seen as something that is sort of like we need to stop innovation if we're going to have better, more responsible technology. It's a choice. We either innovate or we, act ethically and take responsibility and so forth. And I urge you not to see that as a choice. I think we can think of responsible technology not as something that constrains a new business, but indeed as something that opens up opportunities. So you can think, for example, about software that builds in privacy-enhancing techniques as actually something that will make that software more attractive in the market, not only because the customers hopefully are taking responsible use of technology seriously and complying with data protection laws and so forth, but because customers will also be in supply chains where they might have, be able to use a particular technology and then say to someone, higher up the supply chain, this is something we can offer you. We will treat your data appropriately and protect your data in these ways because we have these wonderful tools. So in other words, as an entrepreneur, you can actually look at markets for opportunities in the context of responsible technology for your own organisation, but more importantly, helping customers with their obligations, either legal obligations or more broadly to themselves take responsibility for their own development and use of technology. In other words, moving fast and breaking things might not be the only way to make money as an entrepreneur. All right, so what about other roles? What if you're in government, if you're developing policy? What can you do from that vantage point to enhance responsible technology? Well, you can keep abreast of developments, right, in your area, in your policy field. Think about, what new technologies are coming and what might need to change in your area. So I'll give you an example. If your area is in discrimination law, right, and you're working for an anti-discrimination board or something similar, you can actually start to think about, okay, machine learning is making decisions that will often treat people in unfair ways. right? We know, things like hiring algorithms that only output suggestions that men be hired, or systems that discriminate, risk assessment tools that have higher false positive rates and say that people from particular racial groups get higher risk scores as a false positive more often than people from, say, white racial backgrounds and so forth, right? So we can look at these tools and we can say that actually some of these tools are generating really unfair outcomes that actually have really negative impacts on particular populations. Okay, so if you're sitting in an anti-discrimination policy area, you can actually ask, what needs to change, right? Is this a change in what the law says? Is this a change in how we target our enforcement activities? Is this a change in how we make decisions under the law? Do we need to think about this more? Raises a whole bunch of questions, right? So keep abreast of developments and think if systems are not dealing adequately with problems coming from new technologies, what might need to change? And I'm not suggesting, and I never would, an approach of define and regulate, right? There's a lot of discussion now about do we need to regulate AI systems, right? And look, I think that a sort of technology-specific approach to regulation is often unhelpful because first of all, we'd have to define AI systems and then we'd have regulation specifically for that definition, so it may not capture what's on the horizon and so forth. You'll often get organisations weaseling out of requirements by saying, what we're doing is not AI. We saw that in the context of robo-debt, right? The government released AI ethical principles, but said, we don't have to be ethical for robo-debt because that's not AI. Similarly, if we regulate AI, a lot of people say, we're not really doing AI, we're just doing computer stuff. So, in other words, I don't think the solution is necessarily let's regulate the technology, but rather it's understanding what isn't working, what needs to be clarified, extended, excluded, repealed, what needs to change. Does the law need to change? Does the application of the law need to change? And when new technologies create tensions with values that matter, right, in the context of government policy, what is the best policy response? And that's a hard question. It's not simply regulate X. It actually involves deeper thinking about what needs to change that would best get us to the policy outcome we want. And not only what needs to change, but when should it change? What is the right timing given a lot of uncertainty in the context of, we have a new technology, it's a bit amorphous, we don't know what it is yet. Do we act now? Do we wait to see what happens? These are really hard questions. Most importantly, coordination. One thing we don't see a lot of in government is really good coordination around policy development in the context of new threats from technological change. Often different components of it sitting in different departments that don't talk to each other. There's often, data policy over here, but data security policy over there and data privacy policy over here. And if those things don't congeal, right, if those different policies come from, different departments with different values and don't really talk to each other properly, then we're not going to get any of the things we want. So coordination within government around how the different policy pieces link together. Okay, so that is the sort of thing we need to do in the policy space. And of course, we need to think even outside whatever role we might play, whatever job we might have in whatever organisation. So we are all humans. We, generally speaking, vote. We, generally speaking, make consumer decisions, what we purchase and so forth. And we can do that better, right? So understanding the technology, understanding what it does, what are its limitations, what is its appropriate use, means we can make better decisions. We can, for example, call out government, right, when it implements robo-debt really badly, whether we're directly affected or not. We can say this is not how our government should be making decisions with deep negative impacts on vulnerable people through a non-transparent computer program that no one's checked the formula that it uses to ensure that it only actually issues debt notices where people actually owe the government money. We can call government to account for that kind of stupid, right? And really ensure that governments, and we vote for governments that come to, the electorate with policies of responsible technology and policies that will ensure good policy for responsible technology going forward. We can judge organisations. We can decide what products to buy based on, again, is this a good thing it is releasing into the world? Like, do I really want to adopt this particular technology? Is this good for me? Is this good for my family, my community? Really ask those questions when we have to make decisions as consumers, because we understand, again, what the technology is, what it does, what benefits, but also what harms it might lead to. We can make more deliberate choices around use and how we judge others for what they use. So this is the end of the 3 lectures. I thought I'd give you just a few short takeaways from the wide range of issues that we've discussed. First of all, I think the responsible technology frame is the most useful. Compliance is a baseline, but we need to go beyond that and ensure that decisions that we make, that our organisations make around technology design, use, etc., are responsible, right? That they're good decisions and that we make them thoughtfully and wisely. That requires an understanding of what matters, what values should guide how the organisation designs, uses, etc., technology, right? How you yourself, make choices around which technologies to bring into your house and your lives, right? So that requires a values framework, knowing yourself, knowing your organisation, knowing what else, what external forces are important to take into account, and ensuring that that is actually a guiding star. The next is understanding your context, right? So you're going to have a particular role, inside an organisation, and that role will mean that certain things are more important, right, in your role in your organisation, right? So you can't necessarily do everything from every role, but, particularly to ensure that you play your part, right, in the context of the organisation generally, but also in the context of responsible technologies. That you also understand the technological context, right? That certain values will be more important in some contexts than others. And we gave the example of, automated vehicles not needing to be as transparent as a government decision-making system. Making informed decisions, right? Thinking through what the impacts are going to be of a particular system, doing that sort of impact analysis really well, so that when you make a decision, you're making it knowing, what is that likely to lead to, and how do those likely outcomes align with the values you set yourself as being really important. Doing things like building compliance and values into the design process. Really important as well, as a way of ensuring that the decisions that you make, the micro design decisions along the way, are ones that are going to help ensure that your organisation complies with the law, but also that ensure that the system, that what you get at the end reflects the values that matter, right? Building it into the design process. And finally, while all this is really hard and there's lots of steps, you don't need to reinvent every wheel. A lot of the time there are guidelines and there are standards that will help meet your needs and help, provide a structure for making these kinds of decisions. So hopefully you're all thinking about how you, in your life, in your role, can better lead for responsible technology. Thank you.